Welcome to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe my YouTube, thanks. Chapter 1. The Haunted House. In the dead of night, the abandoned house stood bathed in pale moonlight. For years, it had remained unoccupied, yet whispers of its eerie presence never faded. The townspeople claimed it was far from empty, something unseen, something sinister lurked within. No one dared to approach after sunset, but that night, Emily and her friends decided to uncover its secrets. Chapter 2. The First Step. Emily, Jack, Sophia, and Ben, 4 friends with a love for adventure, stood at the house's creaking front door. With a deep breath, Emily pushed it open. A chilling draft sent shivers down their spines. Dust coated every surface, yet the place felt strangely lived in. The wooden stairs groaned under unseen weight, and distant whispers echoed through the halls. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Dark. As they stepped inside, their flashlight beams cut through the thick darkness. A broken chandelier swayed ever so slightly, though there was no wind. "Did you hear that?" Jack whispered. A faint tapping sound came from upstairs, rhythmic and deliberate. Ben swallowed hard. "We should leave." But curiosity had already taken hold. Chapter 4. The Vanishing Door. They climbed the staircase cautiously. As they reached the upper hallway, the door at the end slowly creaked open, on its own. Sophia gasped, gripping Emily's arm. Peering inside, they found an old bedroom with a rocking chair moving back and forth. A faded mirror reflected shadows that didn't match their own. Then, the door slammed shut behind them. Chapter 5. The Whispering Room. The temperature dropped, and their breath became visible in the air. The whispers grew louder, forming words they couldn't understand. Emily's heart pounded. She reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "Who's there?" she called out. Silence. Then, a rasping voice whispered her name. Chapter 6. The Ghostly Figure. A shadow emerged from the corner of the room, a figure, tall and faceless, drifting toward them. Its hollow voice murmured, "Leave, before it's too late." The friends stumbled backward, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly. Panic set in. The lights flickered, revealing more figures in the mirror, watching them. Chapter 7. The Escape. Desperation took over. Jack kicked at the door with all his strength. It burst open, and they ran, their footsteps echoing wildly. The house itself seemed to resist, its walls groaning as if alive. Just as they reached the front door, a forceful gust of wind threw them outside. The house stood silent once more. Chapter 8. The Curse Lives On. Panting, they looked back at the house. It was just as it had been, still, lifeless. But in the upstairs window, a shadow moved. A chilling realization struck them. The house had let them go, but not for long. Some secrets demand to stay buried. And some ghosts never rest. Would they dare return? The Haunting of Hollow Manor. The Second Chapter. Chapter 9. The Unfinished Nightmare. Days had passed since Emily and her friends fled Hollow Manor, but the house hadn't let them go so easily. Strange occurrences followed them, faint whispers in empty rooms, flickering lights, shadows moving where there were none. Emily woke up one night to find her bedroom window wide open, though she had locked it before sleeping. A single handprint stained the glass, from the inside. Chapter 10. The Return. Determined to end this torment, the 4 friends decided to return to the house. They arrived at dusk, their hearts pounding with both fear and resolve. The house loomed over them, unchanged, as if it had been waiting. The front door creaked open on its own, inviting them in. Chapter 11. The Forgotten Room. This time, they explored deeper, finding a hidden staircase behind a rotting bookshelf. It led down to a basement no one knew existed. The air was thick with dust and something else, something wrong. In the center of the room stood a child's rocking horse, its wooden surface covered in deep scratches. A whisper echoed, "He never left." Chapter 12. The Silent Child. A cold draft circled them, and in the dim light, they saw a figure, a small boy, standing in the corner, facing the wall. His clothes were tattered, his hair matted. "Who are you?" Sophia whispered. The boy turned, his face completely blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin. And then he screamed. Chapter 13. The Possession. The lights flickered violently as an invisible force slammed Ben against the wall. His eyes rolled back, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "He's mine now," a guttural voice rasped from his throat. The others screamed, trying to pull him away, but his body convulsed with unnatural strength. Chapter 14. The Burning Mark. Emily grabbed Ben's arm and gasped. A strange symbol had burned itself into his skin. The same symbol was carved into the walls, repeating endlessly. Jack and Sophia began chanting a prayer, their voices shaking. The house screamed with them, its walls trembling. Chapter 15. The Final Stand. They had to break the curse. Remembering an old legend, Emily pulled out her silver pendant and pressed it against the symbol on Ben's arm. He let out a piercing cry as the dark force inside him shrieked in agony. The walls began to collapse, the spirits, wails filling the air. The house was dying. Chapter 16. The Aftermath. They barely escaped before the house crumbled into itself, vanishing as if it had never existed. Ben collapsed, unconscious but free. As they stood in the empty lot, catching their breath, Emily felt something cold brush her cheek. In the wind, a whisper lingered. This is not over. The Haunting of Hollow Manor, the third chapter. Chapter 17. The Lingering Shadow. Months had passed since Hollow Manor collapsed, yet its presence never truly left. Emily and her friends tried to move on, but the nightmares persisted, visions of the faceless boy, the whispering walls, and the cursed mark that once burned Ben's skin. Then, one night, Sophia woke up screaming. On her bedroom mirror, scrawled in blackened handprints, was a message. Come back. Chapter 18. The Mark Returns. The next morning, Emily found something horrifying. Ben's cursed symbol had reappeared on his arm, darker than before. It pulsed as if alive, and with each passing hour, he grew weaker. They had destroyed the house, but not the evil within it. The only way to end this was to return, or let it consume them. Chapter 19. The Phantom Town. Their search led them to an old librarian, who trembled at the mention of Hollow Manor. He revealed the house was once part of a hidden town, a town that had vanished overnight. No records remained, no survivors, only whispers of a curse that refused to die. He handed them an ancient journal, filled with desperate scribbles. The house is just a doorway. The real horror lies beyond. Chapter 20. The Other Side. Using clues from the journal, they found an old well where Hollow Manor once stood. As they peered inside, an unnatural fog rose from the depths. Then, without warning, Ben fell in. His scream was swallowed by the darkness. Without hesitation, the others jumped after him. They didn't land in a well. They landed somewhere else. Chapter 21. The Town That Shouldn't Exist. They stood on cracked cobblestones under an eternal twilight sky. Around them were ruins of a forgotten town, houses twisted into unnatural shapes, shadows moving without light. The air smelled of decay, and in the distance, a church bell tolled, though there was no church in sight. Then, the whispers started again. You were never supposed to leave. Chapter 22. The Faceless Ones. Figures emerged from the ruins, dozens of them. Their faces were smooth and featureless, just like the boy in the manor. They moved in jerky, unnatural ways, their heads twitching at odd angles. The largest among them pointed a long, bony finger at Ben. His body stiffened, his mouth opening in a silent scream. They want to take him, Jack gasped. We have to stop them. Chapter 23. The Forgotten Truth. Emily frantically flipped through the journal's pages. She found an entry written in smudged ink. They are not ghosts. They are remnants, trapped between worlds. To free them, one must take their place. She looked at Ben, whose eyes were now voids of black. The town was claiming him, unless someone else made the sacrifice. Chapter 24. The Choice. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. There has to be another way. The faceless figures closed in. The journal's final words burned in her mind. One must take their place. Someone had to stay. Someone had to be forgotten. As the darkness swallowed them, one thought echoed in her mind. Who would it be? The Haunting of Hollow Manor. The final chapter. Chapter 25. The Chosen One. The air thickened with dread. The faceless figures loomed closer, their whispering voices merging into an unbearable chorus. Ben stood frozen, his body convulsing as if something was pulling him away from reality itself. Emily knew they had seconds to act. One must take their place. Sophia clutched Emily's arm. We can't let them take him. Jack's voice was hoarse. Then who? A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest. Unlike the others, its face was not smooth. It had deep, hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in an eternal scream. It reached toward Emily, and in a voice that was both distant and deafening, it whispered. You have already been chosen. Chapter 26. The Sacrifice. A cold wave crashed over Emily. The whispers drilled into her skull, showing her glimpses of a past she did not remember, images of a girl exactly like her, trapped in this forsaken town centuries ago. You were never supposed to leave. A horrifying truth gripped her heart. The house, the curse, the faceless ones, this had happened before. And she had been part of it. But somehow, she had escaped. And now, they wanted her back. The figures lunged. Emily screamed as darkness wrapped around her like a suffocating shroud. She heard Sophia crying out her name, Jack shouting, Ben gasping for breath, then nothing. Just silence. Chapter 27. The Vanishing. Ben collapsed to the ground, gasping as the blackness in his veins faded. The faceless ones stopped moving. The whispers ceased. The town around them began to crumble, its twisted buildings collapsing into the void. Jack grabbed Ben and Sophia. We have to go, now. But Sophia shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. Emily, she was gone. Or worse, she was one of them now. The ground beneath them cracked, forcing them to run toward the fading light in the distance. As they reached the threshold of the ruined town, the world around them dissolved, until they were back. Back at the empty field where Hollow Manor had once stood. Chapter 28. the forgotten name. The sky was clear, the wind was calm, the nightmare was over, or so they thought. Jack turned to Sophia. Where's? He stopped. His face paled. Where's who? Sophia frowned. Jack's stomach twisted. He looked at Ben. You remember, don't you? Ben blinked in confusion. Remember what? Jack felt like he was going insane. They had come here with someone else. Someone important, but no name came to mind. No face, no memory. His heart pounded as he stared at the empty lot, realizing the cruelest part of the curse. Emily was gone, and no one but him remembered she ever existed. Chapter 29, The Watcher. Years passed. Jack and Sophia moved on. Ben healed. The nightmares faded. Hollow Manor became a distant legend, nothing more than an eerie tale to scare children. But Jack never forgot, and sometimes, on sleepless nights, he would wake to find his window open. A shadow standing just beyond the glass, watching, waiting, a whisper on the wind, carrying a single, haunting question. Do you remember me?
Welcome to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe my YouTube channel. Thanks. The Cursed Village. Jack had always been drawn to the unknown, a reckless adventurer with a thirst for mystery. When he heard rumors of an abandoned village deep in the woods, he couldn't resist. The locals spoke of strange disappearances, ghostly whispers, and a curse that had plagued the village for centuries. They warned him to stay away, but Jack only laughed. With a flashlight and a backpack, he ventured into the forest, following an old, crumbling path. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just an eerie silence. After hours of walking, he finally saw it, a village frozen in time. The houses stood in decay, their wooden frames twisted with age. The air smelled of damp earth and something rotten. Jack stepped onto the cobbled street, and the wind howled through the hollow windows like a mournful wail. He entered the first house, its door creaking open. Inside, dust covered everything, and old furniture sat untouched. But there was something else, a plate of food on the table, fresh as if someone had just set it down. His stomach tightened. A whisper brushed past his ear. Leave. Jack spun around, but no one was there. His breath quickened as he noticed footprints appearing in the dust, approaching him. The air grew thick, pressing against his chest. He stumbled backward and ran out, heart pounding. The village had changed. The houses looked newer, their windows glowing with candlelight. Shadows moved inside them. A bell tolled in the distance, deep and resonant. Then he saw them. Figures in tattered clothes emerged from the houses, their eyes hollow, skin stretched too tight over their bones. They moved toward him, mouths whispering in unison. You shouldn't be here. Jack ran. He sprinted through the village, past the houses, past the old well in the center. But the path he had come from was gone, replaced by more village, more houses, more whispering figures. He was trapped. A sharp pain tore through his chest as icy fingers gripped his shoulder. He turned to face the creature, a grotesque, eyeless figure with a grin too wide, too unnatural. Stay with us, it hissed. Jack screamed. The next morning, the village remained silent, untouched by time. And in one of the houses, a new plate of food sat on the table, fresh, waiting. The Cursed Village, Part 2. Jack awoke in a dimly lit room, his head pounding. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and something metallic, blood. He tried to move, but his body felt sluggish, like he was wading through thick water. The last thing he remembered was the creature's cold grip on his shoulder, its grotesque grin stretching unnaturally. Now, he was here, trapped. He sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was unfamiliar, yet oddly familiar, a wooden table with a fresh plate of food, a flickering candle, and a cracked mirror on the wall. Jack's own reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. His eyes, they weren't his. They were darker, sunken, hollow. A whisper slithered through the air. Eat. Jack recoiled, scanning the room for an exit. The door was slightly ajar, beyond it only darkness. He had no choice. Slowly, he stood, his legs weak, as if he hadn't moved in years. He stepped forward, pushing the door open. The village had changed again. The houses were pristine, candlelit, and the streets were filled with people, laughing, talking, alive. But their faces, they were the same as the creatures he had seen before. Sunken eyes, stretched grins, their voices too smooth, too synchronized. A woman approached him, her pale fingers reaching out. Jack, you're home. He shook his head, stepping back. No, I need to leave. A ripple passed through the villagers. Their smiles faltered, their heads tilting in unison. No one leaves, they whispered. Jack turned and ran, his pulse a drumbeat of terror. He darted down alleyways, past houses, searching for any sign of escape. But no matter where he turned, the village stretched endlessly. The same buildings. The same whispers. Then he saw it, a small, decrepit chapel at the edge of the village, different from everything else. Its wooden doors hung open, darkness swirling within. He had no choice. He ran inside. The air was colder here, thick with something ancient. At the center of the room stood an altar, and behind it, a massive, blackened mirror. Jack stepped closer, his reflection shifting, distorting. A voice echoed from the depths of the mirror. "You are one of us now." Jack's reflection grinned, a wide, unnatural smile. His own mouth twisted, moving against his will. His limbs stiffened, his body no longer his own. Outside, the village laughed in unison. And on a dining table in one of the houses, a fresh plate of food waited. The Cursed Village, Part 3, The Stranger. The village had remained untouched for decades, perhaps centuries. It was a place outside time, outside reason, where the lost became the damned. But one night, something changed. A stranger entered the village. She was tall, wrapped in a tattered black cloak, her hood concealing most of her face. Unlike Jack, she did not hesitate. She walked straight into the heart of the village, her boots making no sound on the cobbled streets. The air was thick with whispers, the shadows shifting in recognition. Jack, or whatever remained of him, watched from inside one of the houses. His reflection still grinned at him from the cracked mirror, but his mind was screaming. He was trapped within his own body, forced to play the role of another smiling villager. The stranger stopped in front of the old well. She lifted her head, revealing eyes as dark as the void. The whispers around her grew frantic, turning into hushed, fearful. The Cursed Village, Part 4, The End of the Curse. The villagers stood frozen, their hollow eyes locked onto the stranger. She was different, an outsider who did not fear them, whose presence made the very air tremble. Jack, trapped within his grinning shell, felt something stir deep inside him. A flicker of hope. The stranger raised her hand. In her palm, a silver pendant gleamed, its surface engraved with strange, ancient symbols. The moment it caught the dim light of the village, the whispers turned to screams. The villagers convulsed, their bodies flickering like candle flames in the wind. Their smiles cracked, splitting their faces open. Shadows poured from their mouths, writhing and twisting in agony. Jack fell to his knees, his body burning. The thing inside him, the curse, was tearing apart. The stranger spoke, her voice neither loud nor soft, but absolute. "This place does not belong to the dead anymore." The village groaned, the houses trembling as if the very land was rejecting its own existence. Windows shattered, doors burst open, the cobbled streets fractured, revealing black voids beneath. One by one, the villagers collapsed, their bodies crumbling into dust, their souls finally set free. Jack screamed as his own form flickered between reality and shadow, until, suddenly, the weight vanished. He gasped, his hands trembling. They were his again. He was free. He looked up at the stranger. The pendant in her hand now glowed faintly, its job complete. "You saved me," he whispered. The stranger nodded but said nothing. She turned and walked toward the forest as the village behind her continued to collapse into nothingness. Jack staggered to his feet, watching as the place that had imprisoned him for what felt like eternity finally disappeared. As the last remnants of the village faded into dust, Jack took one shaky step forward. Then another. Then he ran, away from the cursed land, back to the world of the living. Behind him, where the village once stood, only silence remained. And the stranger was gone.